Thank you for joining the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast with your host, Clayton Craddock.
John Redsecker is one of New York City's finest musicians. He has decades of experience playing Broadway musicals and is one of the inspirations for this podcast. He was one of the 4 drummers featured in the Broadway Drummers Roundtable in the June 1981 issue of Modern Drummer, and I'm honored to have him as a guest on my podcast 41 years later. John's long list of credentials is stunning. Shows he's done in the past include Barnum, Anything Goes, Meet Me in St. Louis, My Favorite Year, Kiss of the Spider Woman, Beauty and the Beast, The Little Mermaid, Anything Goes, and now he is the drummer for the hit Broadway show Aladdin. You'll learn a lot from his story, so stay tuned for the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast featuring John Redsecker. Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. My name is Clayton Craddock, and today my guest is John Redsecker. He is one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast. I was looking up on a walk one day, I think in 2020, and I was walking with my girlfriend just thinking about what I'd like to do with my life since Broadway wasn't coming back at the time. And I was like, you know what, let me just use the knowledge that I have to try to teach people what I've done over the past 22 years. And I thought about this article that I saw in Modern Drummer, which I'm going to actually show people here. People can see it. It's with Simon Phillips on the cover. It's June of 1981, and it featured 4 drummers in the Broadway Drummers Roundtable with Karen Lacombe, and it featured Dorian McGee, Paul Pizzuti, Mike Epstein, and John Redsecker. And at the time, John was doing a show called Barnum. They all shared their experience of what it was like playing in Broadway pits, and it's like, I don't think anyone else is talking about that anymore. So I said to myself, why don't I just get there and do something like that in a modern sense? And with a podcast, I'm able to do that. And finally getting a chance to speak with the legendary John Redsecker. Thank you for being a part of this.
My pleasure. It's amazing this connection, goes back to reading that article from a long time ago. But it's good to be here, and it's good to talk to you.
There's a picture of you. You're just looking cool with your mustache, and you had this wide collared shirt, and you're smoking a cigarette. You just look cool back. That's what everybody did back then before they maybe figured out, wait a minute, this smoking thing isn't very good for you. I'm assuming you don't smoke anymore?
Absolutely. It's over. Well, I can tell you, I got married in 87. My daughter was born in 89. I quit before she was born. So it's been, many, many years. I finally wised up.
Well, let's just go back. Were you born in New York City?
Goshen, Indiana.
Oh, wow.
Small town, couple hours from Chicago. In school bands, marching band was a big deal in Indiana. I happened to have a really good drum teacher who was a woman. And she was great. Amazing rudimental style. She could play anything. She also was great at mallets and timpani. And I studied with her and was in, the bands that I could be in school, marching band. Then when I went to college, I was only in the college jazz band for about the last year. They had a really good drummer who did until he left. Then I got a shot at playing in the college big band.
Where'd you go to college?
A small liberal arts school in Indiana called DePaul University, down near Indianapolis. Played with some bands, there at school, met some people I still stay in touch with. But a couple things happened while I was in college that made a difference. I didn't expect to be, I wasn't a music major. I never thought I would be good enough to be a professional musician.
You weren't a music major.
No, I was a psychology major.
Why'd you choose psychology?
I thought I'd be a clinical psychologist, a counselor, and play drums on weekends was what I was thinking my life would be.
What made you choose psychology? It's like, were you just interested in it as a kid, or did you have people in your family that were clinical psychologists?
No, nobody in the family. I had an older sister who actually started playing violin first and then switched to drums. So there were drums in the house, which got me interested in drums early on. They were available. So it was fun and I loved it, but I didn't think I was career potential for that. That wasn't, didn't think that was possible. But when I got to college, my freshman year, I met a guy from New York who a piano player that I did gigs with, and he had worked. He was from New York and had worked in the Catskill Mountains in summers, playing in hotels in bands, and he got a few of us to come to New York, and I spent a summer playing in a hotel in the Catskill Mountains, which was a great experience. A different act every night. They'd come in and rehearse. Usually it was a singer or a comedian. And then we'd do the show, and then we'd go downstairs in the lounge and play lounge music. And in the lounge on Friday nights were belly dancers, and on Saturday night were strippers.
Wow.
And it was great. It was amazing summer.
Lots of hi-hat work, I guess, with the strippers.
It was, I was making it up as I went, Nobody taught me about that. I had to figure it out. One night a week we had a dance team who did lots of different, they did Latin dances, they did a bunch of different stuff. And it was really good, broadening playing experience for me to have to figure that out and learn that stuff and play. So that planted a seed, being able to do that and that summer. And I went back to school, and then another event happened. I went on a work study program in Philadelphia for a semester as a psychology major, and I worked at a hospital for drug addicts and alcoholics for a semester in Philadelphia. That was quite an experience also. That, I think, woke me up a little. I got serious about finishing strong in school, and I decided if I was ever going to try music, because I wasn't sure I wanted to go on to graduate school in psychology. So I thought, if you're going to try playing music, now's the time to do it, because you're out of college, you got a degree. I worked locally, worked a year as an occupational therapy technician in a hospital. I worked as a caseworker for the welfare department for a year. I'll get back here. Here's where the music comes back. So the teacher that I had studied with going through high school, her daughter was studying in Chicago. Would go to Chicago to study with a great musician, percussionist, band leader, arranger named Bobby Christian. So Bobby Christian, I remember seeing him play at like a big Ludwig event day. And he, years later, would come down to Elkhart, Indiana, where my original teacher was, and teach a few advanced or adult students. And I was taking lessons from him. there. One day he said, my son Norm, a singer, asked him to audition to play, and he doesn't really want to do it. Why don't you go take the audition? Drove to Chicago, auditioned with these people, and happened to be at Chess Recording Studios. I don't know if you ever heard of that place. I got the gig, moved to Chicago. We didn't have much work, but we would come to New York and showcase and play for record people, trying to get a record deal for this singer. We'd go back to Chicago for a while. Then we'd come back to New York and play some other clubs, and more people would hear her, and some of them would take us into a studio and record. I met people in New York that way. Eventually, the singer got a record deal. The band didn't get to play on the record, which is typical, but I didn't know it at the time. I wanted to move to New York, and I'd met enough people, and I knew folks, and I moved to New York, and that's how I got to New York City from Goshen, Indiana.
You had dreams of being the next E.F. Skinner or Sigmund Freud or Carl Rogers, and you just threw all that away to play drums.
Drums was a lot more fun.
I'm sure it is, especially dealing with, look, we have to solve problems as drummers, but it's probably a lot less taxing mentally than being a clinical psychologist.
It's amazing, to me that it worked out, and that I have been able to be a musician and make a living is still amazes me how it happened.
When you got to New York, was Broadway at any point in time on your radar?
It sure looked good to me because it was a steady job. I thought it looked great, but at that point in time, and I got a chance to sub in a show, but the union at the time made me wait because I was transferring from an Indiana local into the New York Union. They wouldn't let me sub in a show one night. They said, no, you got to wait. And I forget if it was 3 months or 6 months before you can do that, because that's a steady job, and you can't work a steady job until you've been here this length of time. Somehow I did a summer stock of Godspell, which somebody then put a tour together, and I did a tour of Godspell. When I got back to town, I had met Paul Pizzuti, who got to get the show Godspell, and he was going to have me sub for him. But back then, there was nothing in the theater contract about subbing at all. Subbing wasn't even mentioned. It was entirely up to the house contractor. The house contractor for Godspell didn't know me, so Paul couldn't use me as a sub. It was a different world back then. Since subs weren't on the books, the regular players would pay their own subs.
The subs weren't employees of the theater like we are now?
Correct.
Wow.
It was like the Wild West.
Shareholder would pay you whatever they wanted to pay you. Really? Wow. That's fascinating. Did you have to do the same process as we do now? Go and watch and record the show, I guess. I don't know what you recorded on back then, but they didn't have like recordings to give you, and did they give you the music, or how did it work back then?
Yeah, I would record. I'd go, I'd watch, I'd record, I'd get a copy of the book, sub, and hopefully get approved. In the beginning, there was nothing in the contract about subs or the payment of subs. So there's a lot of freedom now that we have, and a lot of protections that we have and that subs have that were not there when I started.
What was the first gig that you had on Broadway?
Aside from subbing, the first show I got of my own was called Barnum, and that was, I think, 1980. I had subbed in the show Annie. That conductor of Annie got called in at the last minute because there were problems in Barnum. Cy Coleman, who was the composer and producer, had said, we want 2 percussionists. I don't want a drummer. This is a circus-y show. They got to the first rehearsal, and Cy said, where's the drummer? So one of the percussionists left. I came in at the last minute, like a day or two before the first preview. I think I played through all of the music once before the first preview. And that was the first show of my own. It was great. The band was on stage, which I think just adds a whole nother level of connection with the show when you're on stage. I think so. I think it really makes a difference. It's a great thing.
So when this came out in this article in Modern Drummer that sparked this whole podcast, when this came out in June of 1981, you were you were new to the whole Broadway scene. How did this interview come to pass? Did they reach out to specific drummers, or how did they find you and get you into this Modern Drummer article?
I don't know how that person who wrote the article decided who to get.
Did you know these people before? Mike Epstein and Dorian and Paul? Well, you knew Paul already.
I knew Paul already for sure, and I knew Mike Epstein. I met him early on, and I subbed for him. When I first met him, he was playing a show at the Village Gate called Let My People Come, which moved to Broadway, and I subbed for him when it was on Broadway. And he also was the drummer in Annie. I subbed for him in Annie.
And Dorian at the time was doing a chorus line.
Right.
And Paul was doing Evita.
But why she picked us, don't know.
Did you know many of the other drummers that were doing a lot of the shows at that time?
Yeah, because I subbed for some of them. I mean, Ray Marchica was there. Jim Saporito, I had met, I think possibly at Radio City, because I subbed at Radio City. Hank Jaramello was still around. He was he took over chorus line when Alan Herman left. I think I knew a lot of the drummers because I was trying to sub for them and trying to meet them. There was a drummer in Greece named Mike Falk, and I eventually I subbed in there. So I was trying to meet the guys and try to get in as a sub.
When you did Barnum, though, in 1981, did they have monitors like they do now? Or was it you were all in the pit and you could just listen to each other?
The band was on stage in a row against the back wall. And we had to wear circusy uniforms. And the show started with the trumpet player coming from the back of the house, walking through the audience and the aisle, playing the opening number. And then we all came on stage, sat down at our instruments, and joined in. And we also marched around some on the stage. And at the time, there wasn't anything in the contract about musicians being on stage in costume and marching around. But that show got people to say, shouldn't the musicians who march around in uniform or through the house in uniform, shouldn't there be some extra pay for that? They're not sitting in a pit. So then the next contract negotiation, I think that got into the contract.
So in 1981, you were playing Barnum. Could a musician back then support themselves by just doing a Broadway show? I don't know how much it was paying back then, but back then, was that something that was steady enough and financially fulfilling at the time to just do that?
Yes. I did other stuff too, if I could. I used to work with a singer named Peter Allen. I did touring with him, and I did, I don't know when it started. I did rehearsals at Radio City for the Christmas show for many years. but I don't remember exactly when that started. While I was doing a show or whether I wasn't doing a show, I could still do those Christmas show rehearsals. But I think, yes, I think you could. I'm single, so I didn't have a family yet, but, thank goodness the union was, we got a building fund started, and you did get health benefit contributions, which was important. So I thought, it was to have a steady show, and it ran about a little over 2 years. I was the luckiest guy around, It was great on stage or seeing stuff. It was a circusy kind of show. And I even went to do my own research. I thought, I want to go see the real circus and see what the drummer does. So I went to Madison Square Garden. I watched the regular circus show a couple times and really listened to the drummer, who was catching three things at the same time sometimes. And it was a learning experience, and it was great, and it helped me do Barnum better after seeing that. And it was fun because you were catching stuff on stage as it was happening, and it was great.
Did you have another show lined up before that one closed, or were you just like, oh man, what do I do next?
I didn't have anything lined up, and I would sub. In between shows, I'd sub. We subbed for each other. When Pizzuti, I subbed for Pizzuti if he had a show and I didn't. I subbed for Marchica. And
very much similar to the way it's done now. I asked this to another guest of mine. Have you ever hired somebody as a sub that has never done a show before?
No.
Did you feel that the risk is too high, or you just didn't? You had so many other people that you work with that you could just call on and say, I have like 5 people that I can just call that I know that can already sub.
I did have, after having my own show and after subbing already, I knew a fair number of drummers who, were working on Broadway and had shows, or then they didn't, or whatever. So, but I would not, I think, I knew how much was involved. It's very difficult to sub. I had done it enough and know how much time and preparation and how over prepared you need to be. It's very difficult, and it takes a lot, and it isn't just the preparation and the music and practically memorizing it, and the page turns and the this and that and how he does this or this. If you can't read and follow a conductor, game over. And I think you need people who are experienced and know how to do that. Even if they're great drummers, this is a unique situation, and it's really key and important to be able to interpret, follow, deal with conductors. It's essential.
So if somebody is coming to New York City and they're eager to get into Broadway and they want to play for a Disney musical, I want to do what you do, John. What do I need to do in order to be a drummer who plays Broadway shows?
I suggest off Broadway. That I think it's a little easier to get your foot in the door. And the more likely that someone is going to allow you to get some of your initial experience at off Broadway or doing a tour. But I mean, tours now there aren't that many of those, and a lot of really good people are, playing tours. Tour is great, and you get experience, and that's very valuable. But I think I think you're more likely to get a shot at subbing in an off-Broadway show than in a Broadway show without having a lot of experience. And it's a good way to get experience. I did the first show of my own was an off-Broadway show, and the first show I subbed in was an off-Broadway show.
So after Barnum, you started subbing again, and you landed another show. Or is it Mayor that you did?
Mayor was an off-Broadway show that was down at the Village Gate. And I did that for a while, and then I got a Broadway show, and I can't remember which one it was.
Not Those Were the Days.
No, that one wasn't actually a Broadway show. It might have been Meet Me in St. Louis I did, or Song and Dance was another show I did. My Favorite Year was another one I did. Maryland, An American Fable. That show was noteworthy because it wasn't doing well, and they brought in a sort of a rescue squad of people, experienced Broadway folks, a choreographer by our Glee, Tommy Walsh, choreographer, and Wally Harper, who piano player, musical director, did Broadway shows, and also worked a lot with a singer named Barbara Cook, who had been in Broadway and then did concerts. And I worked a lot with Wally and Barbara. But that's where I met him. He was part of the folks who came in and tried to help Marilyn, but the show opened and didn't do well and closed quickly. But I ended up doing a lot of work with Wally and Barbara. And one of the great things is we would do Pops concerts with orchestras, which to me was a great experience, to be playing with a singer, and Wally played piano some, and he stood up and conduct some, or conduct from the piano. And just to play with a big orchestra, is different. It feels different. And I was just lucky to be able to have that kind of experience, because I think it was helpful and just expanded me a little more.
Playing shows in New York City in the late 70s and early 80s, I wasn't here until the 90s, and things started to change as far as the city was concerned. You're young, you're not married, had no kids, you're playing shows. From what I understand and what I remember, what I've been told, New York City and Times Square was not the safest place to be. Did you, shouldn't say did you fear for your life, but did you get off the subway and go right to the theater, or was it a situation where you kind of knew how to, hold yourself? What was that? What was the scene like back then?
It was different, and 42nd Street, unfortunately, when I got here, was a mess. A lot of theaters had been abandoned and were porno movie theaters, and to walk from 8th Avenue to Broadway or 7th Avenue, I mean, it was uncomfortable. It was nasty. But there was a whole Times Square renovation that happened that turned it around and transformed it and made it, what the great popular place it is today, where tourists are on the street all the time. But it was a mess then when I first got here.
I'm sure you like the way that Broadway is now as opposed to the way it was in 1981.
Absolutely.
Were you part of the New York recording music scene back then? Were you playing a lot of clubs back then in addition to playing shows?
Not a lot of recording. I did some, but I was not busy doing it. I would make CDs with singers, but I didn't do it a lot. I did some, but primarily shows.
Well, let's just talk about some of the shows you've done. Let me just get this right. Anything Goes?
Yeah, twice.
Meet Me in St. Louis?
Yep.
Those Were the Days?
Yep.
My Favorite Year?
Yeah.
Kiss of the Spider Woman?
Yeah.
Beauty and the Beast?
Yep.
Little Mermaid? And again, Anything Goes again. And Aladdin. Now, you recorded all the cast recordings with all these shows?
Not all of them. Kiss of the Spider Woman started out of town and went to London, and they recorded the cast album in London. So I didn't do that. Beauty and the Beast, they did the film before the Broadway show, and I played on that original animated film. And then I got the show. Mermaid was a cast album. I think there was a song and dance cast album. Barnum, definitely a cast album. I don't know if My Favorite Year had a cast album, or Maryland, I don't think it did.
Do you have a favorite cast album that you've done?
No, I liked the first Anything Goes one. Patti LuPone was in on that one. But I don't know. I guess if I had to pick one, that's the one that comes to mind. Barnum was pretty good too.
And if you had to pick your favorite musical that you've ever done?
Well, I'd have to say the one that I'm playing now is always the one that's my favorite.
Why do you say that?
Because that's what I'm doing now, and I'm happy and glad to have it.
And that show is Aladdin, ladies and gentlemen. So when you were growing up, I know you said it was your older sister that used to play drums, correct?
Yes, she switched from violin to drums.
Was she, one of your bigger influences, or did you have anybody that was in popular music that you're like, that person's cool? Were there any other musicians or any other drummers that you looked up to at the time?
I don't know when I started doing this. I somehow subscribed to Downbeat magazine, and they had record reviews and a blindfold test where they would play records and have, people like Miles Davis try to guess who it was or say whether he liked them, or they had these. And I would read those reviews and stuff, and I'd order records and I'd get them in the mail, and I didn't really know what I was getting, but stuff that was mentioned well in the magazine, I would order some, and I would just listen to stuff at home and try to play along, with jazz records or with. I like the current music of the day. I played in, that I wanted to play also, but I liked listening to these records I would order, not really knowing what I was going to get. And I don't know, I heard a lot of great people. I didn't have just one favorite drummer. There were so many who were so great. It was I couldn't pick one.
If someone were to ask you, since you've done so many shows, what's the most important thing that a drummer should know about being a success on Broadway?
If you like what you hear on this show, subscribe to the Broadway Drumming 101 newsletter at BroadwayDrumming101.com. At this time, we have no advertisers, and we'd like to keep it that way. Our staff is small but growing. We can only produce a show with listener contributions from people like you. To continue producing the high-quality podcast you're listening to, publishing engaging newsletter content, and posting YouTube videos, we would appreciate any financial contributions you can make. There are a couple of ways you can do that. You can sign up to be a monthly or annual subscriber at BroadwayDrumming101.com. You can also contribute any amount you wish through PayPal at paypal.me/BroadwayDrumming101 or through Venmo at Broadway Drumming 101. Or help keep us caffeinated by buying us a cup of coffee or a week's worth at buymeacoffee.com/BD101. That's buymeacoffee.com/BD101. We appreciate any support you can give. Don't forget to subscribe to the Broadway Drumming 101 YouTube page. You'll find more content that isn't featured on the podcast or on the Broadway Drumming 101 Instagram page. Make sure when you subscribe to the YouTube page, you click on the button to be notified when a new video is published. Be sure to visit our new shop at merchandise.broadwaydrumming101.com. Thanks again for listening to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast.
If someone were to ask you, since you've done so many shows, what's the most important thing that a drummer should know about being a success on Broadway?
As far as the skill that is the most crucial, I agree with Warren Oates. Following the conductor, being able to follow conductors is the make or break skill. Because there are people who can play, and there are people who are willing to work hard enough to put in the time to learn it and to try to copy what the regular's doing. But if you can't negotiate a conductor and figure them out, because you have to play for different conductors. I mean, in my show, there could be one of four guys any night, any show. Pretty soon it'll be five different, So that to me is the crucial, sort of unteachable skill that people have to develop and they have to learn, and they can't. You can't practice that at home, and it's not like a skill thing on your instrument or your chops or your memorization. It's the real time, in the moment, following conductors, I think, is probably the one most important skill, if I had to pick one.
Beauty and the Beast ran for 13 years?
13 and a half.
Wow. How did you keep things fresh for 13 and a half years?
I would take off and do other things when I could. Play with, I got to play with a lot of good singers, doing club acts or things like that. And I would try to get out and do other things. I still did rehearsals at Radio City for the Christmas show a lot during the day. I just did as much, I hardly said no to anything because I figure whatever job you have is going to end. I tried to, do as much as I could, had a family, a couple kids, wanted them to go to college,
Playing the same thing the same way every night. You said you do other things in order to keep things fresh. How do you not get bored when you're there?
If there are spots in the show, and luckily there are some spots in my show that I can play a fill, and I tend to play, 95% the same way, but there are some spots that I can actually change a fill a little bit, or I can play a different fill or something different. But 95 plus is, trying to be consistent and trying to make sure that the time is solid and that everybody knows where the time is and that it's clear. I feel like that's my job and my first priority, so that everybody can play together. And I also think, maybe it's the second show of the day, but for the people in the audience who spent a lot of money, this is their maybe first and only time they're ever going to see this. I'll be here tomorrow, but they're only here now. So they deserve to get the best that I got when they're here, because this could be it for them. And the dancers, they need to feel the music. They need it's important to them. It makes a difference. I did a show called Dancin', and a tour of it. I subbed for Alan Herman and did a tour of that show for 6 months, and it was about dancing. And it was so physical and draining, they had to do it in 3 acts. So there were 2 intermissions. It was about the dancing, and you realize how important it is to the dancers, all the accents. It makes a difference. They need the energy, they need the intent, they need it helps them. So I just try to remind myself that these people are only going to hear this and see this once, and the cast is working hard to give it 110%. I should be doing the same. And the really good people that I've worked with, Cheetah Rivera, Anne Reinking, they only know how to do it 110%. They just don't know how to do it any other way. Peter Allen was like that. Lots of folks that I was lucky enough to work with. And I think that's the way I try to approach it. I certainly am not always... I make mistakes. Absolutely, I make mistakes. But I'm trying to bring the intent with me.
When I went to see you play Aladdin many, many years ago, I noticed it was a little bit different from what I was used to in certain pits, because I haven't played that many shows, but the shows that I've done, they've always been in a pit where I've had headphones and an Avion. You have hotspots, correct? If I'm not mistaken, speakers.
Actually, no. I have a headphone. I have headphones and an Avion, but I'm not completely enclosed. There's plexi around me, but it doesn't go clear to the ceiling. I did one show where I was completely enclosed, and I didn't like it. And I asked to not be completely enclosed in Aladdin because I like hearing the live sound of the orchestra. I feel like I can connect better with them. I do use the avions and sometimes one ear on and one off. And maybe it's just quirky about me, but I feel like I connect with the band better this way.
So your shows that you've done over the years, you've never had a drum booth?
Once I did. No, I'm trying to think. It might have been. It's probably Mermaid. Yeah.
And you weren't really into, you prefer not to have that?
Yes.
Okay.
I can understand that there needs to be plexi and soundproofing and stuff around the drums, absolutely. I certainly don't want to drive anybody crazy playing too loud next to,
Mm-hmm.
But to be completely enclosed, I felt like separated me from the rest of the orchestra, that it didn't feel as good to me. Could be just quirky of me. I don't know.
In all the shows that you've done, have there been many with click tracks, or have they mostly been without click?
Mostly without.
Fascinating. Something that you would advise a drummer to never do in a Broadway pit?
Argue with the conductor.
Have you heard of people doing that, or seen that, or have you done that yourself?
No. I think, and I think Ode said something to this effect too, is if the conductor wants something, you say yes. Or if he, we're there to make his job work because he's making the music work with the stage. So if he needs something, then that's part of our job, I think, is to help him do his job. We need the drummer needs to be the conductor's friend. He's got to feel like you're there helping him do his job, because he's got to, make the stage happy and make the stage and the band work together. And so we got to be on his side and helpful, trying to make his job as easy as we can.
So other than The Lion King, Tarzan, Frozen, it seems like you are the drummer for the Mouse. You are the Disney drummer.
It worked out, but I wouldn't have thought of it that way. The first thing, the Beauty and the Beast film I did was here, and they did it in New York. The same conductor conducted those shows, Beauty and the Beast, Mermaid, and Aladdin. So I think about relationship, and I think actually relationships are a good thing to keep in mind for people starting out and who want to do shows and whatever. Is you want to build relationships with people. So for me, it's been these shows you've mentioned have all been the same conductor, because you want the conductor, whatever the next project is, whether it's another show or he's doing a cabaret act with the singer, or the people in the band that you were, have some other gig and they, if you want, you want those relationships to continue and to grow. and it can lead to other things outside of your particular show. And it's good to do outside things. It's good, I think it's important.
How did you meet the conductor of Aladdin and Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast?
He was an assistant to this guy I mentioned before, Wally Harper, who came in to try to fix a show that was in trouble. And he was an assistant. He was a student just out of school, and Wally had heard him when he was in college, and when he started in New York, he was like Wally's assistant on this project that I met that Wally worked on. And so that's how I met him. And it was a few years. He did tours on his own. He did other shows. He did other things. And then he was the conductor of Beauty and the Beast at the Broadway show.
What's his name again?
Michael Kosserin.
Okay. Doing so many shows over so many years, do you have any specific gear that you prefer to use? Do you have endorsements?
I never sought out any endorsements, and I didn't. One company, somebody offered me drums, and I didn't really want to switch to them. I didn't want to have to go through getting the name of the drum company and the program of, I didn't want to. So, no, I never got any endorsements or pursued anything. I was lucky enough early on. Do you remember Modern Drum Shop? Joe Cusatis ran Modern Drum Shop. I guess it was closed. Maybe it was one of the two real drum shops in the city. And I had seen Joe Cusatis years ago, and I studied with him when I got to New York. And he opened up a drum shop, and he made a trip to the Zildjian factory, and he took me and another of his students, which was a great experience. And I had these guys. There was a guy from in the Zildjian factory who was assigned to me, and helped me go around and pick out cymbals that I wanted. And I mean, it was like a kid in a candy store. It was it was amazing to be in that factory. But I never pursued endorsements. I have 3 or 4 different kinds of sets.
If people wanted to come to New York and play shows, you talk about building relationships. You're very generous with your time, and you've allowed me to come watch. And if somebody wanted to get in contact with you, do you allow people to come watch you to play, or do they have to be people that are ready to sub? I don't know what the situation's like now. I mean, I know now it's a little bit different, but in general, do you have people come in and watch that just want to see what you do, or is it more of a thing where they should be like kind of ready to sub for you?
It used to be I would gladly allow anybody to sit with me, any drummer interested, I would. But because of the pandemic and because of testing, and I don't think that's possible anymore.
Yeah.
So I haven't had anybody come and watch and sit with me unless it's a sub specifically gonna sub on the book and learn the show that way. It's unfortunate. And if things changed enough and it was doable again, I would certainly let people sit with me just to watch. Because people were, when I was getting started there, people were very nice to me. And it helped, when people were nice and encouraging. And and I feel so fortunate that I've been able to do this, for a career. And I would be happy to, but it's not really feasible right now.
There are certain people that have a big social media presence. Are you on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram? Are you that kind of person? Or are you just like, I can't do this? Is there you have a website?
I don't. I'm afraid I've failed miserably in all of that. I don't have any of those things. Somebody talked me into LinkedIn years ago, and that's the only thing I'm on, and I don't look at it. So no, I'm I guess out of date and old school on
it's
participating in that.
It's a lot of work trying to do all this stuff. A lot of people have Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, website, YouTube pages. It's a lot of work, and sometimes
I can't imagine. I couldn't keep up.
Yeah, sometimes it can be overwhelming. It's like you got to pick your poison.
Yeah.
Anyway, John, thank you very much for taking some time out to share your story and to hear you talk about the business of Broadway and what we do in the pit, and to hear some of the ways that you've managed to have such a lengthy career.
Well, thanks. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you at your next show.
You keep putting that out there. I gotta take it in and digest.
I think it's going to happen. Yeah.
Well, thank you again, and we will definitely talk soon.
Great. Take care.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks again for listening to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast.